You're tuned in to the MtG Cable cast, where they cover Magic, the Gathering Finance. All right? You don't know about it? You're tuned in right now and get ready to learn some shit. Buckle your seatbelts and light a blunt and get ready for the MtG Cable cast. Starring Reptar and Thirsty, them onion head motherfuckers.
Alrighty, guys, welcome to the newest episode of the Cabalcast, and this week we are holding ourselves accountable yet again. We are doing our look back at our Bloomburrow preview to see how badly we fucked up, if at all. So with that, let's take it away.
So before I start, I'll pose the question, how well do you think you did? How well do you know you did? Going back, I don't think I took some big swings, but I'm pretty sure, again, I missed, but in a good direction for 2 out of the 3.
Okay.
How about you?
So I was right about one, not in the way I thought I would be.
Okay.
I was spot on one how I thought I would be, and I was very wrong so far on another.
Got it. All right. So up top, for overhyped, this is the one that I think I landed, and I said that the infamous Cruel Claw was going to be, or was overhyped and going to remain overhyped. And when we take a look at the commanders from this set, it is in the top 5, which is fine, but it's not the most played Rakdos commander either. Cool. People basically want to cast Emrakul's off this thing, and it seemed to have the longest, brightest, burning bit of hype throughout the entirety of the season, along with Yagra, which is like the second most popular commander. But like I said, now this is the 5th most popular commander from the main set. Somehow this is not the most popular Rakdos commander from the set, but as a generic Rakdos commander, it's being overshadowed by Rakdos commanders from the sets around it, newer and older. So kind of as expected, people are slamming these Eldrazi's, Eldrazi Titans, regular Titans, other gigantic creatures, but the high-end payoffs, we're not really going to see a lot of new additions over time, so the deck is kind of what it is.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. It does the one thing. It's like Kaalia of the Vast. It just does the thing, and very rarely do you get cards that interact with the thing in a meaningful way. So I think we're done here with this card. I think this is going to be the top end for playability on this card. If we get a new thing to slam through this, like Valgavoth is not good enough because it doesn't do anything when it enters the battlefield, then, then we would see a re-up in this, right? It's a cast trigger. Valgavoth doesn't have that. Eldrazi Titans generally do. The actual Titan cycle, the factual Titan cycle, and their spiritual successors generally do. And we very rarely get something that'll move the needle on this. So you'll hear me talk about Razageth again next week, but that was a card that moved the needle on Kaalia, because insofar as I remember, the activated ability on Razageth doesn't say as a sorcery. So inside combat, you can just start tutoring things to get ready for the next turn, or make your cards
ridiculous.
Yeah, or make your cards permanent. That card moved the needle. We already have Razageth for the infamous Cruel Claw. They go together really well. But it's going to be difficult to really see a reason to want to continue to play this. That said, I did just judge a CEDH event this past weekend, 81 players, as we saw in the photo. We had one person in the event playing this as their commander, and I know we had additional Rakdos players, and I think the best performing one that made it into the top 8 was Rakdos Hired Muscle. It's a combo kill. I didn't really get a chance to watch it, but he's a local, so I can ask him. I'd never seen him playing it before. The other Rakdos deck that I know that was there was Angie, that has several combo kill wins that include World Gorger Dragon Crab. So like I said, we see this card already outshadowed by Rakdos commanders older than it, and ironically newer than it, because we've had some commander stuff come out since.
Yeah. This was one that when you called out, I specifically, we both had the reason for this card that people were basically calling it the new Ragavan.
Yeah.
And it turns out that was a very tall order for a card. I didn't think this one would be good in EDH. It was a card I thought might see play in a 60 card.
Yeah.
And it hasn't yet.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is one that I think was I don't know if it's just people wanting something to like address like, oh, you or force the high power level on that they want that every set now.
Yep.
They expect some absolute Ragavan level banger, and if they don't see it, they're disappointed. But I never saw this card being as insane as everyone did, and I'm glad you were right on that one.
So you're overhyped.
Yes, my overhyped was Balin the Haymaker. He was the bunny, specifically the raised foil version. And this is the one where I thought I was right, but not quite in the way that I thought I would be. So I remember when we picked these, that at the time the Ral alt art was more than Balin. And I said, all of these cards are too high in price. But if one is going to be the correct price, but if there is one that's going to be like desirable and have a high price, it would be Balin. Mm-hmm. The thing I did not anticipate was Balin basically staying the exact same price. It's not like, I mean, the strange thing there to me is Standard's good now. Limited seems to be good in the format. Mm-hmm. And a lot of this product was opened, and it didn't result in what you see with a lot of the higher end foils that we've had recently, where it just craters the market on them unless they're serialized. And this was not serialized. It kept the same price, but everything else did go below it in price. And there's quite a few cards that have dropped almost $100 or more out of those. So I definitely, again, these alt art, really cool hype treatments that are special because they happen in every set and they're thematic, and that makes them less special. This is something that we've been saying for a while, try to kind of stay away from.
Yeah.
It's not something that's going to last, but that there may be some diamonds in the rough with these, which may not be the best phrase for it. And identifying Balin, I'll pat myself on the back for that one, at least recognizing, hey, this is kind of like a banger card.
Yeah.
That just happens to have this really cool alt art treatment you can get it in.
Yep. I'll pull up Rec again. It is the #1 commander in the set, not by a lot, by about 300 submitted decks compared to Yagra, but it is performing well. We both identified this as a fantastic card for Nea. It was something that I was looking at for my own picks. And insofar as using things like this as a speculative vehicle or a financial vehicle is difficult, because even when you take a look at the snapshot of data afforded to us by TCG Player, they're honest with you and just tell you this sells 2 copies a day. So if you were going to pick these up for buy list and move them, that's, that is your churn. Right.
Yeah.
So is your money better spent somewhere else? Is it better spent? So this has a market price of like 192. So is it better spent taking that like $130 to $150 and just buying a bunch of like Shocklands or other cards that are going to churn faster, so you can largesse that pile? Or do you want to just kind of park it for a couple of days in Balin and make less? And there's benefits to both, but that is basically the comparison piece. I honestly I forgot about this. I thought these cards would have tanked a little bit more because they seemed a little too high end for the average, a little too highbrow for the average commander player. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. If you're playing Nea tokens and you just want a new commander, then you don't update the deck that often, so you got a stack to throw at this card. So go for it. More power to you. My underhyped card was Innkeeper's Talent, and like I said when we recorded the episode, by the time we got here, because we did it a little late, it had already blown up. This is basically something that I don't really know if we need to talk that much about. It does everything we expected it to and more. I did not think the Golgari deck would be as good or as popular in Standard as it is. This is one that I think I got wrong. I think this was, I said it was underhyped, but I didn't realize it was going to be as underhyped. And I didn't think that it would basically become this $20 staple because of standard. I knew this card was going to be good. I think it is the most popular of the talents inside of the set. And like we discussed in the episode itself, everybody who plays it uses all parts of the buffalo, so to speak. Every where it's levels on talents, all the levels are extremely optimal for a tokens-based deck. It gives all of them ward, which makes them extremely sticky and difficult to deal with. There's nothing about this card that people just don't like, don't enjoy. And so this is where I went wrong, but because I undershot expectation. Now, as we started to see standard turn after this, we saw standard get more aggressive. We didn't have the Rakdos Lizard deck that has been popping up. It is very low to the ground, but the control deck kind of turns the format into a slog, or it can. So there's the opportunity for the mid-range deck to kind of fall out because this aggro deck is tuned to get underneath a ramp deck that can start gaining life and basically outpacing the creatures on turn 3 or turn 4 with its own token generators. So if the mid-range deck does get pushed out for whatever reason, then we see a drop in playability on Innkeeper's Talent in terms of constructed, and thus we'll see the price come down a little bit as the draw to them, the demand for this card kind of wanes.
This is one that I also think it just long term, and I said this on the episode, like being just right or underhyped on a card like this, I still think this is not as high as this card will go long term. I could still see a world where this hits 25 to 30, maybe even outside of rotation, because it's such an insanely good card for EDH and a counter strategy. Mm-hmm. And you take every doubler you can get, every single one. It doesn't matter how specific they are. You jam them all in there. And this to me was, one of the cards that when you look at it in a vacuum, doesn't seem that good. But then when you think of the context of, it's got all these counters, it's doing this in these colors and this aspect of the color pie, card gets insane.
Yep.
I don't know why people weren't talking about this more. My underhyped, on the other hand, was kind of a broad pick, and it was Mythics under $2. And I specifically cited Warren Warleader as one that I could see going a little ham. And basically what I had said was, it seems like every set now we get some mythic that just takes off. There's some bulk mythic that people don't understand or whatever, and it just flies under the radar and takes off. Well, sure enough, we're now at a low of $3 and a market of $5 on Warren Warleader. Now, this is one that I, specifically said this is the one most likely to do it because it's cute tribe. A couple of the other ones that I picked did not go above. I picked the Black Season, which ended up being one of the worst. The Green Season would have been a good mythic to get in when it was at that price. But I think this is something that's just a good reminder of, hey, this card was, I think it was $1.20 something when we did the episode originally. And now it's $3 plus $1.27 shipping. So that's what, 4x at that point.
Yep.
There is still, if you want to deal in the gutters and deal in the chaff, money to be made in these sets. You just have to be a lot better about identifying what it is and what's going to sell and what is popular in the market right now in order to find that. And I think that's always been something that obviously as a, reserveless slumlord, I love the challenge of doing that. And that's just something that I think a lot of people may forget. And hey, this card was bulk when the set came out.
Yep.
So if your locals crack the case, they build their set, they trade it back in, this is probably sitting in bulk still and it's a $5 card now. So proud of that one too.
Yep, not a bad look overall. I think there's going to be a lot of, I don't want to call them gems because that might be a little too much, but there's going to be a lot of reason to go back through bulk rares and bulk mythics from this set as tribes get additional support in time. And something like this is going to get a push eventually. It's really good with a card from the Commander's set called Jacked Rabbit, which just makes a lot of tokens when it attacks. And so there's a lot of like cross synergy between these products, which you would expect, and a lot of opportunity for people to come back and in a year or two, if we don't revisit Bloomburrow in that time period, but we do get more rabbits to say like, okay, what can I do with this tribe to go wide or find better cards to play? And yeah, I think that flies below the radar. And there are a bunch more in this pile of mythics and arguably some rares that can get a lift when we come back round to it. For me, my last card, the Just Right, was Dawn's Truce. This is the heroic intervention, but with a gift a card. So colorless and a white, instant, gift a card, so your opponent gets to draw a card. Then you and permanents you control gain hexproof until end of turn. If the gift was promised, permanents you control also gain indestructible until end of turn. And since we last talked, this is now in 26,000 decks on rec. That's about 7% of the 380,000, I guess, decks that involve white as a primary color on rec. And it is the third most popular card in the set, and I undersold this card, or I just didn't really predict that people would want to play like the next one, But we are seeing it paired with heroic intervention at huge rates below that, like next in line. When you look specifically for these cards, it's Teferi's Protection and Flawless Maneuver, basically the same spot, and then Akroma's Will is at much lower rates. So this is kind of becoming like the package of protection options. Players have identified it, and now we kind of know what the floor looks like to really break into this package, because we're on like the fifth or the sixth one of these things. So, and we're now finding out what the mana value is for the floor on these, what the caveats have to be to break into this package, because after a certain point, a certain number, they become superfluous. You're going to draw more protection spells than you will cards that require you to have the protection spells. So you got to set a floor on this. And I think now we've identified that floor, and moving forward, we're going to be able to identify what versions of these cards are going to be good enough to compete with the rest. And so that's why I think I did undersell, at the end of the day, Dawn's Truce. I just didn't understand how powerful only being 2 mana was. That gifting a card to give your permanents indestructible wasn't nearly as detrimental as I thought it was going to be. And so this is a card where I was wrong, and I'm happy to be wrong on it.
Yeah, and I think that's a great spot. I think, the important thing here is, one, hey, it's good. And 2, we do know what the floor is now, which is a good way to evaluate going forward. And I think that, like you said, your danger is getting to the point where you have more ways to protect than you have things you need to protect. And that's kind of what we'd be getting towards. But I think this is probably the floor for this effect. If not, maybe one of the better ones as the game goes on. We'll find out, I guess. But I like it a lot. My Just Right was an otter, and that was Ral Crackling Wit.
Before I forget, which art?
The regular was the one that I'd called. And I was right. I said it's a $4 to $6 card while it's in standard until it hits the EDH realm and gets some time to take off. And I think we both touched on the fact that this is another Ral that gives you an emblem that's like one of the best blue cards ever printed. And it's, draw 3 cards. And then, all your spells have Storm, which is, great.
Fantastic.
But I think this is one that just right now the formats are at a state where this isn't viable in Modern. It's not really seeing play in Legacy. It's kind of viable in Standard and Pioneer, but it's not really that good. So it's something that probably has a long-term home in EDH. And what I was actually very surprised by was how few of them sell on a daily basis. I thought this would be selling significantly faster, like 50 plus copies a day. It's been at like 20 to 30 for pretty much the entire time it's been in existence. So this one may take a little bit longer to pop off in EDH than I may have first thought. But I certainly think right now, for its effect, for what it does, for where it kind of sits in the meta, yeah, $4 to $6. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird. I don't know exactly where this fits in EDH rec when you're looking at it. Like, it does go in some of the Storm decks, some of the Prowess stuff, and like then there's just Otter decks, but it's not like a super good card. And I don't know if people play it in the 99 or as the commander either. This is kind of an odd one.
It's a weird, like, it's not that it's a card away from having a home. It just seems like there's got to be a home for this somewhere that already exists. We just need to figure it out.
Yep, exactly. And I think one of the problems with the Storm Commander in general, man, nobody's even playing it as... Oh, you can't because it's a Planeswalker. Duh.
Yeah.
Nobody's really playing the Storm deck or wants to play the Storm deck anymore because it just sucks all the fun out of the game and takes all the time. And even then, like... Unless you're playing a proliferate version of the deck, you got to put so much time into getting this up to -10 and getting the emblem. Otherwise, you're just slamming it into play and drawing 3 cards and discarding 2. So it's not even a great Storm card in that regard. It's a little innocuous, but it does play well in the Prowess decks. So it just seems to be another one of those cards, like... Not with a split identity, but that just wants to play in the middle and doesn't really work out like that. And we seemed to get a glut of them at Strixhaven in the commander decks.
Yeah.
And then they backed off, but they've been doing this here and there ever since. And if you look at the Strixhaven commander deck, the best example of what I'm talking about is the Simic deck. The Simic deck wanted you to clone creatures or make 0/0 fractals and put a bunch of tokens on them. And you can't clone a 0/0 with tokens. You can, but you're not going to like the outcome.
Yeah.
And so it was this deck of split identity where the cards just didn't play well together. And that's kind of what we see here with Ral. It doesn't matter that all your spells have Storm when you don't cast them. You put a copy of them on the stack. Those 2 keywords don't play well together.
No.
So what are you trying to do here? And I think it's this misidentified card by WotC that is kind of underserving the community.
What their target market is, yeah. Like, we know what you want, and we're just stopping at 80%.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I like it as a prowess card overall. If the emblem had more to do with that, I think it'd be a lot better. But so I think there's a lot to like about this card, but even more to dislike because it's just kind of not good, unfocused.
No.
So
it's a very casual card from a design perspective to me.
Yeah, but you could be playing Jace Bellerin if you want to draw cards.
Yeah.
You would net more cards.
That is true.
Overall, with Jace Bellerin, than you would with this. And then you get to mill somebody out. Like, the minus is actually, like, relevant.
Yeah.
So, I can understand why people aren't really moving in on that one, or they're not banging down the doors. Anything else to talk about before picks?
Let's take it away with picks.
All right, so I'm going to go first because it's ironic. I'm just going to sit here and monologue about monologue tax. And this is from Commander 2021. It's an enchantment, 2 and a white. That says, whenever an opponent casts their second spell each turn, you create a treasure token. So this is basically a riff on white taxing effects, if you want to look at it that way. When I took my notes, CK was buying 36 at $2.30. They're currently buying 38 at $2.30, so there is a demand for this card, although it seems pretty light. They have 12 in stock at $5.50. On TCG Player, there were 132 listings with a market of $4.44. There are currently 149 listings with a market of $4.76. So we're seeing people just kind of shove this card back into the population and not undercutting low. They're just kind of selling around low, and so it's pushing up the market as more people jump in and buy the cheapest copies. When I added this to my list in May, CK was buying 41 at $3, so we have seen a drop in both of those numbers. I didn't get the retail on it, though, and there were 98 listings for a market of $5.19. And in between May and now, what happened was not the list printing, but we got a reprint in Duskmorn. So we are looking forward to that. By the time this episode drops, you'll have been able to purchase the Commander decks by a few days.
Yep.
So when we're looking at this card in Commander, what does it do? Nothing more but introduce the same kind of squeeze that a lot of like white permanents seem to want to put on the game. It is a bit resource generating, not overly, but it does do a little bit. When we look at the format writ large, we look at Smothering Tithe and Trouble in pairs, and then this, and this. We can see these three cards kind of make up this non-creature based taxing package in white. But each card that I've listed, Smothering Tithe, Trouble in pairs, Monologue Tax, are each more palatable than the previous. That's actually the kind of interesting part about this. Though, unlike other parts of the package in Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, Dranith Magistrate, and a number of other creatures, these three are more advantage engines than immediate taxing pieces, or stacks pieces, or whatever you want to call them. Resource catch-up. They can and do put a squeeze on the game by letting the controller run out ahead of the resource game and to start to play from ahead, but it's not the same kind of resource denial game that the other cards that I mentioned actually play. Monologue Tax being the most palatable, unquote, or if you want to take a riff from EDH Rec, least salty of these three, however you want to look at that. When we look at it, we can see its utility across levels of competitiveness. We have Mondrak and the original Avacyn on the more casual side of things, but then we have Tivit at the actual CEDH end. Like Monologue Tax has a home, which is fantastic in both like Big C and Little C versions of Commander. And this is great. This is kind of a low impact, highly playable mana engine, again in quotes, in white, that plays on the idea of the, again, catch-up style of resource game that white has become known for, with Knight of the White Orchid, then the new Mythic for 4. You can kind of look at Falia as something like that, where you really want to like flicker your stuff. White Orchid Phantom plays into that. I can't remember the name of the card that Richard from Goldfish loves. Secret Rendezvous is a draw spell. I think that's the name of it.
Yep.
White has a lot of these catch-up mechanics, and this kind of helps play into that. But again, in a palatable way. The singular trigger per turn, accessibility of the card, and overall play pattern centered around this card should keep it like high on the list of top white cards within the format. Right now, it's somewhere in the top 40, but it being so easy and agreeable compared to, again, Trouble in Pairs and Smothering Tithe make this a really palatable option for most players and most play groups. When we look at this on a timeline for speculation, again, taking my notes, there were 341 total copies of the C21 version listed. It sells about 7 to 10 copies a day between Nearman and LP. And while the market price did look to be dropping into basically today, the shipping cost was actually floating this to being almost a $6 a card. So seeing that market price rise actually tells me a little more that we're probably seeing cards that are priced properly instead of using shipping costs as a crutch or shipping costs as a gotcha for direct buyers.
Yeah.
Now, TCG Flips 2 has 30 Nearman copies at $5.41 on the first page of sellers. When you're not filtering, but looking at 50 vendors. And then legit MTG has 40 Nearman copies at $8.14 on the third page of sellers. And that's it. Everybody is well below those. So we're basically going to be working through those. And then once they're pulled, again, we're looking at like a $10 card. Now, this does become a $7 card just after we hit the second page of sellers, after the initial 96 copies sell through, which will take under a month at the current velocity. But with the recent reprint in Duskmourn Commander, I do expect this to start selling under 5 copies a day, starting, again, the week this comes out, with a bunch of copies listed just at dirt prices to get them out.
Yep.
So what we were seeing now of people not really mucking with low by coming in like 20% under, I do kind of expect that to happen once the Duskmourn copies actually do hit TCG Player. When I was taking my notes, there were like 3 vendors total that had them listed. Nobody wanted to hedge a guess or even just throw anything up. Or catch the ire of WotC for listing cards early, whatever it is. So basically, we should eat now as cheap copies get listed, and hopefully there are just no crumbs when we turn this back around in a month or two as Duskmourn copies are pulled off the market. I do know, like we know, that the Gaming Co. still has TCG Player open infinite product and shove on the market. So when we see their brick of a couple hundred pop up, we know it's going to take about a month to churn through that. That's kind of the expectation. Or the Gaming Co. just loads really high and everybody works around that, but it's so high that it doesn't impact the price that we're looking at, and people buy the M21 copy because it's just effectively like noise of individual sellers, and they're not going to sit there and reprice this fucking card, just run it through their algorithms. No way, not when it's selling at this price for that issue.
Yeah.
Reprint equity. No,
sorry.
good.
Yep. No, you're good.
I don't have much to say for this because they just caught a reprint. I can't tell you when it's coming back, but obviously it's coming back. It took 3 years.
Yeah.
And a list printing, but we finally got it. This one's really like kind of difficult to suss out. I wouldn't expect this to be the one to always come back. I do like the card, the catch-up card that they printed in Bloomburrow, the Mythic that costs 2 and 2 white. It's a 4/4. It basically does a little bit of everything. Yeah. It does a little bit of it looks at your opponents. It looks at life total. It looks at lands. It looks at creatures, and it does a lot of stuff. It's kind of like Timely Reinforcements plus.
Yeah.
And I would like to see that card reprinted more often than the white enchantments, because creatures are easier to deal with, but they're a little more fun. And the creatures only trigger on ETB. So if you really want to trigger them again, you got to work. It doesn't just always happen. So it can reduce a lot of the play patterns that people don't like. It reduces mental burden of tracking triggers, etc. But I can't really speak to that. I had no idea we were getting a reprint on this, and I honestly would have said that because they kept iterating on this, we wouldn't have seen one. We would have seen a new card, but here we are. So obviously, question mark. But the 3-year gap does speak to, like, we might be good for a couple of years.
Yeah, and that's kind of been their thing lately is, as a card I'll touch on next week, similar to this one in my pick, they seem to wait 2 to 3 years if they're going to reprint any effects like this. Yep. And I think the thing that makes these more palatable is that as opposed to some of those taxing effects that prevent you from playing the way you want to, this one, like, you still get to play your game. I just get a reward for you doing whatever it is you do. And I think that that's kind of what they've leaned more into. And I think that, we haven't found our floor on these yet. Nope. To bring it back to earlier. But I have to imagine that whatever the floor for this effect is, it has to be worse than this. This just has, it's just a good long-term casual commander card.
Exactly.
3 mana, you cast 2 spells, I get a mana I can use whenever I want. Great.
Cool.
And, I still get to play my game.
Yep. So. And it's not overwhelming resource advantage like Smothering Tithe is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's not smothering.
Yep. And then the last little bit I have, buy quantity for this. Right now, I've got 1 copy for personal play, but I have not bought into this as a spec yet, mainly because my locals either play more aggressive taxing pieces or are too casual for this to resonate. So once this hits bottom, I'll probably pick up a small brick. And it floating in like the 470s is probably right around where I'll move in. And then because I can't serve my locals, I'll be looking to out this to buy list. So somewhere between like 8 and 12 makes sense for me.
Yeah. Solid. Approve. I, on the other hand, am kind of being flavorful with the pick, but there's a reason for it. I am picking Camellia the Seed Miser from Bloomburrow. She is a rare rather than a mythic, but she is a 3/3 menace that gives other squirrels menace. Whenever you sacrifice one or more food tokens, create a squirrel. And then for 2 colorless forage, put a +1/+1 counter on each other squirrel you control. So you can either sacrifice a food, which she gives you a ton of, or you can exile 3 cards from your graveyard, which it turns out she's in the colors where you're fucking with your graveyard a lot. She's great for that. So why am I picking her when there doesn't seem to be any reason? Well, it's because in an interview last week and in a Blogatog post, it was backed up by Marrow, they said that they are very highly optimistic and see a very good chance of revisiting Bloomburrow. And that is important because if you remember when Neon Dynasty happened like a decade ago, or just 2 or 3 years, whichever is more accurate, all of the Kamigawa guys that could have been generals when Neon Dynasty came out saw a surge in price. They saw a surge in demand that wasn't there before. And granted, Kamigawa was a different story. It was a much lower open set. But I think now we've got the opportunity where we have bulk cards that people forget about and just disappear, where we can ostensibly see a little bit of a surge. So right now the card's sitting at less than $2. Great. That's what we want.
Yep.
As far as timeline, anything like that, I just bought 12 of them earlier today because they're $1. I'm going to put them in a penny sleeve when they get here, throw them in a 1 row, and forget about them until we come back to Bloomburrow. Because at that point, I will check them and see if I have made any money. But it's the kind of thing that now that we are in this design cycle of not really having a lot of new places to go to, we're just going back to the places that we knew before that were good.
Yep.
And obviously this year was kind of an exception, but we've already had people at Wizards talk about, oh, we want to revisit Outlaws. We want to revisit Bloomburrow. Okay, well, what's going to happen with Gloomhaven? Are we going to want to revisit that in a couple of years as well?
Yep.
And it creates this opportunity where you can find these kinds of cards that have a lot of upside and a lot of options for you to say, hey, I'm not going to park a lot of money in this because I don't have to, but I can make an insane margin on it as a long-term, like, let me just throw $10 at it, forget about it, and see what happens in a couple of years. Just good experiment. It's in a tribe that matters for EDH because Squirrelcraft is a thing. So if you want to be a casual player or if you want to be a 75% player, this is a card that you can use as your general. Obviously, Chitterfang is another one that you have for squirrels. This one for me is about squirrels and the backup of having like a combo finish to it. So you've got that 75% appeal as well. Although, frankly, this is never going to matter in CEDH, and that's just the reality. But for all your friends at your kitchen table rounds, this is something that I would expect to see at a table come a return to Bloomburrow, when people have forgotten about this card and all of a sudden they wake up and they're like, great, there's insane squirrels in this. Let's go get this squirrel commander, and it's a $5 card overnight.
Yep. I'd read this card and I noted that it was going to be good with Chatterfang, so I'm glad we made that call. I didn't know if it was going to matter that much if other people would be playing it. So I'm looking at Chatterfang right now on Rec, and Camellia is in 64% of the decks, but it's in the top card section, which is fantastic. There are about 16,000 Chatterfang decks. Not the biggest showing. There are about 10,000 Camellia decks, and Chatterfang is one of the top commanders for this card, which is fantastic. And then also listed in the high synergy. So people have recognized, and I believe correctly, that these two cards play really well together. And so this becomes one of those packages that we like to talk about. So if you're going to be looking at Camellia like you mentioned in your discussion, Chatterfang is also a card you can be taking a look at. And then within that, there are still additional bundles of cards that kind of go together. They might not be extremely expensive, but they could just be a pain in the ass to find. So having them all in one place is decent. Toski goes in all of this stuff because guess what? You got, like, people love drawing cards with this. Then there's some stuff from Modern Horizons 2, I think. That's when, no, 1, when we did the squirrel stuff.
I think it was, it was 2.
Yeah, like Deep Forest, Hermit, and some other odds and ends from that set that I can't remember off the top of my head, and I don't want to keep scrolling, that also play into, like, this little bit of a package. Then you go into, okay, like, do we want Coat of Arms alongside this because we just want to turn our creatures sideways? And you can either do some of this parallel specking or put together packages for people who just want to get started with it, or invest in them kind of equally and go wide. And I think there's nothing wrong with this. I think this is a neat little identifiable package. I honestly forgot about this card. I lost it in the set, so I'm glad you upcycled it.
One other interesting thing about it is when you look at just the vanilla data the TCG player lists, and it says there's an average daily sold in the last 3 months of 38. My assumption is because this has been out for such a short time, that quantity has to be from the very beginning. So I opened it. No, it is still selling nearly 40 copies a day right now.
Yeah.
When seemingly nobody would have any need for it, and there's less than 1,000 there. So if that keeps up and we don't see more, we could reach that flashpoint a little bit sooner. But I don't know how likely that is. It was just interesting to see that with a card from a set from months ago, you're still seeing this kind of liquidity for something that's seemingly bulk when 2 new sets have come out since then.
Yeah, no, I think it's really cool. So I'm glad you picked this out. This is, like I said, I think a nice, good example of a package of stuff or an individual spec, however you want to move on it. So I'm glad we got a chance to talk about it.
Yeah.
All right, anything else before we take off?
Let's call it.
All right. So for at MtG Cabalcast on Twitter, Facebook, Patreon, and YouTube, I am at Halt. I am Reptar. You are
at Damon_Thurston.
We'll see you next week.